Today on Gunbelievable, we're taking a look at the Rogak P-18. This gun is so awful and obscure that there are 0 videos on the internet of anyone shooting one. So today, we're going to change that. Does it pay off? Let's find out. When the Steyr GB, a perfectly good gun, came into the US in the early 80s, distributor Les Rogak somehow got his hands on the technical data and decided he'd try making copies. The history's fuzzy, we don't know for sure if he was authorized or if there was a lawsuit, but he made somewhere between several hundred and 2,300 of these, and his approach to manufacturing was to give a Dremel and a case of liquor to a chimpanzee. Now, before we start, most P-18s today only have one magazine. They don't interchange with the GB, and extras are unobtainium, but I overcame this through the magic of buying 2 of them. I'm glad I did, because I've discovered shocking mechanical differences between these 2 Rogaks. I'll be starting with the one whose serial number starts with a 2, and we'll come back later to the one that starts with 12. I also need to mention that Rogak grips are made of a thin, fragile plastic that tends to crack with age and handling, so to preserve mine, I've replaced them with reproductions. They're identical, except that they're a slightly lighter, less shiny black than the originals. With that out of the way, let's talk about the weight. As a clone of a full-size, all-steel service pistol, the P-18 is heavy. It's almost 46.5 ounces over 1.3 kilos when fully loaded with 18 rounds in the mag and 1 in the chamber. Size-wise, it's huge, being just a hair taller and longer than a Glock 34, yet significantly wider. Picking it up, it feels every bit as substantial as it looks. On top of its general weightiness, the long barrel and slide make it a touch front heavy. It fills the hand entirely. The grips could be grippier, but they're fine. There are some fitment issues, some gaps between the frame and the panels, that's with both originals and the reproductions, but I don't really feel it unless I'm trying to. The slide's not too stiff, but it hitches a lot, and the serrations could definitely use a bit more texture. It doesn't lock open on an empty mag. The checkering on the hammer is not very aggressive, but I have little trouble using it. The slide release sticks out more than on most guns, but since we've already given up on being svelte, that's just fine. It's easy to activate in both directions. The safety is a simple slide-mounted affair that blocks the hammer from hitting the firing pin, but doesn't affect the trigger otherwise. You can see the mechanism quite clearly here at the back of the slide. It isn't perfectly crisp, there's a little bit of play in it, but it clicks positively into both positions, and it does what it needs to. The trigger is double or single action. Cocking the hammer doesn't move the trigger or hold it rearward, so there's a long, light take-up to get through. If you then pull super slowly, you'll notice it hiccup through a couple of stages, but most of the time you'll just go straight through what's effectively a wall. It breaks at 2 pounds. That's pretty light. In double action, it's smooth and even, breaking at about 8 pounds. The reset is a moderate length, audible but not tactile. It's not as nice as the quality double action guns at your local gun store today, but it's genuinely not bad. The magazines are double feed, which means that the cartridges feed alternately from left and right instead of tapering to the center. That's kinda neat. It's unusual for pistols, probably because the gun has to be wider to accommodate it, but it means you can load by just popping cartridges straight down instead of sliding them in. The corners up here are a little sharp. They stab your thumb a bit with each round, and if you ever try to unload, rounds tend to nosedive and get stuck, or suddenly pop out 2 at a time. We'll come back to that. The base plates are made of the same material as the grip panels, so I don't have a lot of hope for their durability. Rogak moved the GB's magazine release from a thumb button to a heel release, which isn't the preferred style today, but it works all right. I give it credit for being ambidextrous, unlike the slide release or the safety. The mags do pop out nicely, however, inserting a magazine is made a little more difficult because the release gets in the way, so you won't be reloading this quickly. The sights are very basic irons, pretty standard for the era. The front sight is molded into the slide and thus not swappable, but the back is dovetailed. No idea what compatibility there'd be with any aftermarket options. The machining on these is so poor that they don't look quite square. They're a little rounded and blobby, which is gross. Speaking of bad machining, this gun is of absolutely atrocious build quality, and the longer you look, the more you find. Most of the frame is polished, but the back of the grip and the top of the slide aren't, and you can tell at a glance it was made cheaply by casting. On the front of the front sight, you can even see the remnants of a casting seam. The grip panels are secured by these ugly hardware store Phillips head screws. The recoil spring channel on the front of the frame is just obviously uneven and done by hand, poorly. None of the safety components on the back of the slide are perfectly square. It only gets worse when we take it apart. Unlike the GB, there's no disassembly lever. Instead, the mechanism has been made less nice for the end user, but simpler for manufacturing. You come up to the muzzle cap, press a punch in there, twist the cap off counterclockwise while preventing the spring from going flying, then pull it off along with the spring. To get the slide off, you do this weird maneuver where you pull it as far back as it'll go, then lift the front a little bit, pull it back farther, lift the rear, push it forward, and finally remove. On the inside, we're seeing even more signs of utterly awful machining. The frame rails look dented and banged up, the barrel is roughly welded onto the frame, the edges of the feed ramp were poorly trimmed by hand, the inside of the slide is not any better, with several cuts being uneven and some pockmarked surfaces. Looking down the barrel, I see many tiny scratches traveling its length, but they don't seem to be rotating much. Like the Altor pistol, it appears to be effectively unrifled. We'll see how much that affects our accuracy on the range. The GB, and therefore the Rogak, is supposed to be a gas-delayed system. Some gas from firing is siphoned off and sent through this collar, exiting through these two holes at 3 and 9 o'clock. This ring and the muzzle cap create a sealed chamber, allowing that gas to push on the cap and resist the rearward travel of the slide. But for all this to work, you need really good fitment here to make a good seal, and on the Rogak, not so much. Plus, the Rogak only has one sealing ring, whereas the GB has multiple. So the gas delaying doesn't really work, and the gun is effectively blowback. But blowbacks need stiffer springs and heavier slides than this has, so problems ensue. For one, the slide travels so fast and hard that it beats itself to death. In response, Rogak added this set of buffers just underneath the barrel to help cushion the end of travel. Those will wear out over time, and I don't really like the way they're just sitting in there loose. It's possible to get them cocked up at this angle, where they'd be less effective and probably break quickly if the gun is fired. The other problem with this gun acting like a blowback is that it would try to extract empty cases too quickly, sometimes ripping the rims off. Rogak's solution to this was to delete the extractor claw. There's still a channel for it in the slide, the breech face has a slot for it, but its business end has just been ground off, taking advantage of the fact that blowback guns don't technically need extractors. Incredible. So if you have a malfunction, or a dud round, or you just want to unload your Rogak, you can't simply run the slide. You'll need to lock it open and shake it. If that doesn't work, you'll need a screwdriver for prying, or maybe shove a rod down the barrel. Normally at this point we'd head to the range, but remember, I bought 2 Rogaks, and if you thought the first was bad, you ain't seen nothing yet. The 12 prefix gun somehow manages to cut many more corners. The frame is no longer polished anywhere, leaving the flats of the slide and the muzzle cap as the only shiny surfaces. The trigger is just slightly heavier and less smooth, coming in at 2.5 pounds for single action and a whopping 12.5 for double. The safety has more friction to it. It feels and sounds cheaper when it's actuated. It's no longer mounted in the slide, but rather through the slide, having been converted to a drum-like mechanism with a disturbing amount of side-to-side play. When I installed the reproduction grip panels on the 2 prefix gun, they went on just fine, but when I tried on this one, the left didn't quite fit. I had to use a Dremel to shave off some material here. When that worked, I wondered how the original panel had fit if a known good reproduction didn't. Well, looking at the underside of the original, here's your answer. Just imagine shipping frames so malformed you have to Dremel the grip panels before it leaves the factory, and then imagine doing it this poorly. Notice too how this pin was just a bit too long, and rather than trimming it intelligently, they just went to town on it with a grinder while it was still in the gun. Moving on, the slide on this gun is far more difficult to manipulate than on the previous. It's so stiff, it takes everything I have to pull it to the rear. While it's on this table in camera frame, I can't get enough leverage on it to lock it open. And here's why: it has an extra spring. The original Rogak design had some band-aids to cover up being effectively blowback, but with this version, they've dropped all pretense. The new spring is just like what you'd see in most blowback pistols, and since we're not even trying gas delay anymore, the collar around the barrel has been shortened, its vent holes deleted, and the muzzle cap has been shortened too. The extractor channel has been filled in, a few of the cuts on the underside of the slide have been omitted, the encasement around the back of the cartridge rim has been removed in favor of a flat breech face that looks like it was made of Play-Doh and exposes a worrying amount of brass when viewed from above. My favorite bit is this feed ramp, which looks like it chipped a tooth. I was already nervous about shooting the first Rogak, but with this one, I'll really be putting my body on the line. Alright, on the range with the Rogaks. The 2 prefix gun has a somewhat stiff kick, similar to a compact 9mm like a Remington R51 or a Walther CCP. Given its huge size and heavy weight, it should shoot like a dream, so that's an embarrassing result. The sights are a bit off to the left, but accuracy is otherwise good, surprisingly. Reliability was not so great. I got through the first dozen rounds or so just fine, but after that it had a tendency to try to feed 2 new rounds out of the magazine at the same time, just like what we saw when we tried to unload the magazine by hand. And as you'd expect from any gas delay design, it gets hot pretty quickly. The 12 prefix gun is an entirely different animal, and an angry one at that. Its recoil is snappy and painful, like a Walther PPK or other subcompact blowback gun. That's wild in a gun this big. It also proves that while the original Rogak's gas delay system may not fully work, it's definitely doing something. This gun malfunctions every round or two, with several failures to feed and some double feeding issues like with the first gun. Manipulating the slide to clear these, or even just to reload, is again super difficult. It failed to set off the round a couple times, so I think it's light striking. Accuracy is terrible. Check out these 5 rounds I put into the head box at just 5 yards. My shooting's not perfect, but it's not that bad. These hits are all over the place, and the large ragged holes prove that the bullets are tumbling. Without stabilization from proper rifling, precision is going to be impossible for this Rogak beyond arm's length. So who are these guns for? Well, if you've ever looked at a Zip-22 and thought, that's just too well made, too accurate, too reliable, too mainstream for me, then the Rogak P-18 is your gun, especially the models in the 12,000 serial number range. But I have no idea how these sold to anyone otherwise, because these are the most overtly terrible guns I've ever seen. That's it from Gunbelievable on the Rogak P-18. Smash that like button, be sure to subscribe. If I get 1 million subs, I'll buy a third.